All right, welcome to Cleveland Heights City Council Committee of the Whole. It is June 15th, 2026 at 5:32. Addie, would you please call the roll?
Cobb.
Here.
Larson.
Here.
Posh.
Here.
DeWitt Foy.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
Kuda.
Here.
Stone.
Here.
All right, we are going to do a very short executive session. Councilman Cobb, would you please read?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss with an attorney for the public body claims or disputes involving the public body that are the subject of pending court action or in the judgment of such attorney appear likely to be the subject of a future court action or claim.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Andy, would you call the roll?
Cobb.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Posh.
Aye.
DeWitt Foy.
Yes.
Cohen.
Aye.
Kuda.
Aye.
Stone.
Aye.
Okay, we are back from executive session. We're going to go into legislative review. I'm going to start with first reading for consideration for adoption. All right, so 1/16/2026, an ordinance adopting City of Cleveland Heights Comprehensive Plan for Affordable Housing and Down Payment Assistance Program. Who's here from the city to speak about that? Okay, oh, I see there. Okay, so obviously I'm going to ask council for questions first. And seeing none, here come mine. So I just wasn't aware that, I thought all this came from either ARPA or CDBG. So since this is non-federally funded,
Correct.
where is this money coming from?
So this is what sparked all of this is because we don't normally use non-federal sources for repair type things or down payment assistance. Because we used ARPA to pay some general fund expenses and freed up general fund money.
Right.
So it's ARPA general fund.
Oh, so it is the money that went into revenue, okay. I didn't realize that made it not federally funded because
Technically it's general fund.
I got it, okay. And in the, well, I don't know, it's one of the whereas clauses. Brian, it says Ohio Revised Code Section 17604. This comprehensive plan for development and maintenance, where did that come from? Because who has to have a development and maintenance plan?
It's a requirement of the city for when you use non-federal sources that provide for affordable housing.
It's a requirement of the state that's imposed on the city if you're going to use tax revenue to fund a down payment assistance program.
Sorry, that's not my question. Let me rephrase it. Who has to come up with this plan?
Oh, the city did it. So if I understand correctly, it's largely based on the city's CDBG and home-oriented, what do they call it? It's a consolidated plan, right?
Consolidated plan.
Under HUD 2, yeah.
Okay, but not, okay, I thought, for some reason, the way I was reading it, I thought maybe the person buying the house had to have.
No, that's the plan. The plan that references is Exhibit A in the packet that we have.
Yeah, and I did read through that. And this is quite a load here that this does. But I know we're not gonna do every bit of this, like landlord-tenant counseling and stuff like that. I mean, but all right, I don't have any other
I
questions.
mean, a lot of those things that we do already do. from federal
Yeah,
sources.
I know.
And I'll just mention that this is really important that we move this forward so we can continue the down payment assistance program. We
Oh,
have
yeah.
had homeowners that have been affected, or prospective homeowners who've been affected by the procedural issues, so.
And there's a
very
lot
glad-
of people in the queue right now,
Yeah,
which is a good thing.
right, and so I'm just glad that the administration was able to move so quickly on this to get this back up and running this month. It's really important.
All right.
Quick comment,
Oh,
if I
please,
might,
yeah.
or question. Can we get a report at some point about how many people we have assisted with this program over the years. I don't know. Hopefully we're keeping statistics going back a ways.
We kind of do it by grant, but we can combine them.
Right, nothing urgent, but maybe something near the end of the year where you could let us know how many, and I think that would be very important to get that information out to the public. I'd also be interested in knowing how many of these homeowners, I don't know how long we've had the program, are still here in Cleveland Heights 4 or 5 years later, if there's any way of tracking that.
Majority, I mean, from what I can tell, the majority have, because there's most of our DPA programs, I think all of them from since I've been here, have if there's any forgiveness, if there's any sort of, it's a deferred loan, basically until the property transfers, so we're notified when something moves.
Yeah, and also if you could give us the address where the homes were too, just by the end of the year, thanks.
Actually, if it's all right, council member, at the beginning of next year, the state of Ohio requires us to report
Okay,
all that to them, so if it could wait until
Yeah.
early next year.
that's
All right.
great.
All right, 117 is a resolution appointing Nicole McPherson and Don Lucier as members of Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Any comment about that? 118 is a resolution appointing Denise Baba as a member of the Transportation and Mobility Committee. 119, a resolution proclaiming July 26th National Parks and Recreation Month. Very controversial. Okay, first readings, 120. An ordinance to amend certain subparagraphs of ordinance 241-2025 and subsequent amending ordinances relating to appropriations and other expenditures. Anybody, I'm sorry, I gotta. Okay.
Right, I have a question,
Yeah, please, go ahead.
just getting to the, just looking at your fund analysis, I'm getting to the page. Sorry. You know, I can ask the finance director later on.
Okay,
Were you looking for the balance as the last as of the last report? that
It
we
was
had?
the debt retirement, which is a very substantial transfer, mine's like 310. So just not able to.
all right, 122 is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with A&H Equipment for the acquisition of a Pelican three-wheel mechanical street sweeper. We get reimbursed for that.
You said 122, but I think what's 121 came before.
That's the,
Resolution for any
I'm
ORC.
sorry. Did I read? You're right, I skipped that.
Well, they're both street sweeper related, so.
Related, yeah, they are both related to one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, 121 is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a cost share agreement, which is for the street sweeper. Thank you for that.
And this was budgeted, I mean, or is this something that she found a new piece of paper?
I can answer that question. We get community cost share monies from NER state. So we have to spend X amount of money per year. And we usually try to save it up for infrastructure projects, but we had to spend a certain amount of money this year, so we're gonna use the community cost share money for the purchase of that.
And is there,
it's
what's
totally
left?
Yeah, it's reimbursable, it's 100% reimbursable. I mean, we'll have to pay for it and then it'll be reimbursed.
And what's left in that cost sharing account? Should we have other infrastructure we need to repair?
I don't have that information, I'm sorry.
So that begs the question, I wasn't aware that this was money that has to be spent by the end of the year, but to your point, does it have to be spent by the end of the year? Is there like a June 30th, or do we have another 6 months? And then if we have another 6 months, is this the highest and most pressing need that we can use the funds on? Or,
I believe it ends at the year, or to take the money.
This is because of the 5-year carryover. into the program.
Yeah, and then we have, I mean, this is a very important piece of equipment that we need. It's gonna help tremendously during our fall leaf season. That's why we wanna kind of get it down and get that bought before the season.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason I ask is I know that the streets team has been working on getting us a demo of this trackless leaf loader that we've been waiting for a while. And my understanding from talking with John Becker, and he gave me the brochure for it, I know more about trackless leaf loaders than I've ever thought I would know, but it can come with a lot of attachments. And I'm just wondering if we need to jump into this for the LEAF program if we're thinking about a shift, like an overall shift in how we might do LEAF pickup. And if we don't have to spend this for the next 6 months, then perhaps we pause and give it a few months till after recess to assess whether this is really the most pressing need.
Well, we wouldn't, the purpose why we want it now is so we can use it in the fall. I mean, that's one of our major components of it. Plus too, it opens up different avenues where we can, we're running sweepers every day, basically, going on, as well as we have 3 routes that we do sweeping on. And that gives us the power to do that with one, in case we have one is an older one, it's gonna be used as a spare in case they break down. They're very complicated pieces of equipment and they do have issues at times, but this one in particular is more of a heavy duty type. And we already have one.
Mayor?
And this is up for first reading tonight, but Director Clinkscale gets back tomorrow, so we could share with her your idea and see if she has any particular thoughts and get back to you before second reading for adoption.
Yeah,
Well, we could refer this to, are you on for the 22nd, your committee, municipal service? I mean, do you wanna just put that on? Could we get Director
day?
Clinkscale by the 22nd?
So what time? Let's look at the,
I think
Oh,
it's 6
boy.
o'clock is committee hall.
Like, here we go.
Quick question while
Yeah,
they're
go.
looking. How many working street sweepers do we currently have?
Three.
And this will give us 4.
Like I said, we have 3 routes that we currently take during leaf season, so every route has to have a sweeper or else, it just looks like garbage.
And outside of the leaf pickup, how often are we running these street sweepers on our side streets?
We do it as part of our maintenance program during summer, spring, summer. We did it during spring pickup, obviously fall pickup. And then we try to run the city twice throughout the remaining part of the year.
And how often are we trying to hit our commercial districts?
It's all included with those, and particularly John Becker has them go to Lee Road a lot, first thing in the morning on Fridays to make sure that's good, as well as the other districts as well.
just on timing again, you had mentioned that this is, Public Works is hoping to have this ordered now to have it used in the fall. What is the delivery timeline?
I don't know, I could get you that information.
Okay, cause I know we've had snowplows that were very delayed in terms of delivery, so.
yeah, we can, so we could certainly ask Director Clinkscale those questions. With regard to referring it to committee, we have the special council meeting at 5 where we were hoping that this legislation would be passed. And the committee meetings follow that special council meeting. So if it might be possible for us to answer those questions in advance of the 22nd and get back to you individually so that we could still vote on it in the special council meeting at 5 p.m. on the 22nd, that would be preferred.
I didn't realize this one was gonna be on for second reading on the 22nd.
No,
For the owner's rep, well, we can discuss outside.
So are we good? You think I know you can't speak for Director Clinkscale now, but can we try to get her for the 22nd? Is that?
Try to get her at the committee?
Yeah. At the committee.
Certainly,
Yeah.
and Again, I think that we were hoping that this could be up for adoption during the special council meeting, which we can discuss outside of this. So we can try to reach out to people in advance of then, so that you can both get an answer before the 22nd and then also have her there at the committee of the whole discussion on the 22nd.
Well, that would be after the fact.
Correct.
Right,
So we could, there are a lot of moving parts here. We could certainly try to answer these and then get back to you after this meeting.
So can we all commit to sending our questions to Dr. Klingscale with maybe a CC to President Kuda before next week?
we can, but I'm just wondering if we can can we separate the street sweeper expense budget change from the owner's rep, because the urgency is around the
So-
owner's rep, so can,
I guess I defer to law and finance if they can put together a separate piece of legislation.
Or we could simply strike the line item in Fund 201.
right, that's what I'm asking, so if we can move forward and then take care of the street sweeper on a longer timeline.
And potentially add it to a future budget adjustment. We can talk with the director, can certainly go down that route, and then we can talk with the director to learn what sort of lead time she needs.
I just don't wanna hold up the other piece for a piece that is not as urgent.
Okay.
So, Mr. President, if I might then to clarify that, the finance director is indicating, because of the way that the legislation is structured, that it would be an amendment to the attachment or the exhibit to 120. And it's,
Can we update that for the second reading then?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, we're simply gonna strike Fund 201's appropriation change.
Alright. Alright, cause it's first reading law. Okay, so I'm gonna move down to 123. I don't wanna read this whole thing, but this is an ordinance declaring improvements. This is for a TIF for the work that's gonna be done at the Alcazar. So basic deal is 30 years, the 70% of the tax that would go to the school still goes to the schools, the 30% goes to the developer, of which that's like 10% of would come, ordinarily come to us, so that's our contribution. And then there is a clause about the rent for the renters who've been at the Alcazar at least since July of 2022. This is first reading. This is something we could also discuss in finance on Monday, a week from today. But anything anybody wants to ask now, see Rico's here and the gang, so. Any questions from? Yes.
Yeah, so I asked Brian Anderson about this. I'm still trying to get a clarity on it, but hopefully, this was a couple of years ago, but hopefully we can work through the timeline. Brought this up last time around parking, and my recollection is when this was brought to BZA several years ago, you had requested essentially to use the existing parking on site, the number of stalls on site. Requesting a variance from the city requirements for what would be additional parking stalls. That was rejected, and what came to pass was an agreement to lease 20 additional stalls off-site. Is that correct?
We had already leased 20
Okay.
additional stalls, so I think we proposed that as part of
As the fix.
our request for the variance.
Okay. Can you provide the cost for that?
I think our cost is $40 a month per space.
And is that a city lot or is that off-site?
That is the city garage behind top of the hill where the ascent.
And are Brian, do you know, are those the same cost as $40 a month? That's essentially what we charge for, yeah.
Rico probably rounded, but yeah, our rate is $115
per quarter, got it.
Yes.
Okay, so then if $115 per quarter, that rounds up to, or that's $9,200 annually. So my question is, do our rules of the city requiring you to add parking to this project that you otherwise wouldn't have done without those rules, are they adding cost to you such that now the city is being required to subsidize this project in order to pencil? And I understand that it's not one-to-one, but I find it absurd that our rules are adding cost to this project that then we have to subsidize in order to make it pencil. So I don't think there's really a way forward for this particular deal, but as we move forward with our comprehensive zoning reform or review, I would suggest that we look at all of the rules that the city requires of new residential development, whether that's single or commercial, and try to find a way to alleviate the additional costs that we are placing on these developments, such that now we have to provide a subsidy in order for this project to pencil. I would also point out, I think my understanding is that parking rents are not included or are not extra. They're included in, or they're planned to be included in the rents of the building. Is that correct? Or have you not got there yet?
We haven't gotten there.
Okay.
I think what we assumed as part of our parking study is that offering a more affordable unit without a dedicated parking space allows renters that don't need a parking space, who take multimodal transportation, an affordability component by not having to, not obligated to lease a parking space.
What was what was the total number again that you said you would be paying for the parking?
$115 a quarter, I said $40 a month.
Which is $9,220 a year, $9,200 a year. So, $10,000 in additional ongoing operational cost to the project that now we're turning around and subsidizing.
Is my math correct that if it's $10,000, let's use $10,000 a year over a 30-year TIF, that's $300,000?
No, it's more like $420,000 because if you're looking at any type of inflation, but with a 3% inflation rate, I think that gets us closer to like 420 or 430,000 in
That's
total.
about half the TIF,
Total 30-year cost.
correctly, right?
I wouldn't have that number in my calculus.
Well, no, I'm asking Brian, like the TIF is,
600.
that was close to 900.
The net present value of the TIF is somewhere, around $490 to I think $650, depending on where discount rates ultimately fall. Which the same thing, you'd have to apply the discount rate to the 9,000,
Yep.
over that same period.
I see Director Zanf's hand somewhere.
I just wanted to mention in response to the councilman's comments, so as part of the comprehensive zoning review, parking is absolutely one of those topics that we're having the team take a look at, knowing that our standards are outdated. And whether that's decoupling parking from, having that option from parking to be separate from the actual unit rent, is something that we're also exploring through our economic development incentives. So I think we're recognizing that that is a barrier in some of these projects, and like you're pointing out, it impacts the bottom line.
And not just the bottom line, but the goals of the city. If the goals of the city are to add housing units to grow the population, and then yet our rules are making that harder to accomplish, I think that's something that we should look at when we're going through our zoning review.
And just for context, I think over the last, at least as long as Director Zamf's been here, for conditional use permit for projects that come through the planning commission, the planning commission have been reducing parking requirements case by case. I mean, that's a very common request that developers make, and almost, I can't think of one where we said, no, you have to keep your parking, because that's been general, the objective, right, is to move towards more like multimodal, less parking, et cetera. So I think we do that on a case by case basis with the points well taken around the global zoning changes.
Any more discussion on this topic? I'm gonna go to section C or letter C under section 2, which is page 110. on the rent moderation. So this is Director Anderson. When this 3-year period where the rent could not go up more than 10% a year, when does that period start? I see it says
Commencing on the effective date.
of the legislation,
Of the development agreement.
of the development agreement. And
That's how I read it, yeah. And my intent was when the unit is finished. It may not be written.
Okay.
So then we can amend.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Rico was saying it, you know, from his perspective, he wanted it from the end of when the unit was complete.
Councilman, maybe I can propose why I put it in there after our last meeting.
Yeah.
So, good evening, everyone. So Council President mentioned that what he didn't wanna have happen was have us incentive being provided by the city. And thereby, we improved the property. We improved the green energy carbon footprint, we improved the ADA compliancy, renovated all these units, and then somebody that was at the property got priced out and ultimately got pushed out of the property. And what I said was I would propose something that I thought we could work with. And what I proposed was that upon completion of the property, if somebody lived there before I bought the property and they wanted to stay, that I could not raise the rent more than 10% per year for 3 years. And that locked in a price that if somebody's been there 20 years, that I'm not the greedy developer that pushes those people out. I thought that was a reasonable way to do it. And the reason why I did it with people that were there before me was a lot of the people that are in the property now that were not excluding the people that are I'm gonna call them lifers that were there before 2022. We've had a property that's been announced in the paper that we're going through historical tax credits. We've had a property that's had some demolition to figure out what we have in a 130-year-old structure. So a lot of the residents that are there right now went there because it was the most affordable option on the street. So I don't know that the intent was to provide the people that were price sensitive that came to the property because it was a good deal, because they knew the property was going to be renovated, to be the beneficiary of it. I think the intent was, you're a longtime resident of the Alcazar, you like the original charm, don't let this developer get greedy and push you out. So that's why, that was the intent behind our entire thesis of the way we priced.
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted to see how this was gonna be implemented. I would like to discuss this further in the finance committee meeting. Is that part of committee, sorry, in committee of the whole on Monday, week from today. Is that okay, finance chair?
Sure, I'm gonna be running the meeting on Zoom, maybe you could run that part of the meeting.
Sure.
But just to put a finer point, I think if the developer's intention is to have it begin when the construction is over, can we amend the developer agreement accordingly?
And that is actually, sorry, what it says, it's effective with the effective date, but the measurement is started at the completion of construction, and then it's the 3rd anniversary of that date.
Perfect, okay, so then we don't have to do, okay, great.
But I'm just saying, I feel like I need to do a little bit more research and then come back to the committee and talk then. I mean, you know, it's first reading today, so, you know.
Addie, you'll change the agenda, thanks.
Enrico, thank you for all that, appreciate it.
Thank you, Council President.
We're 124. 124, an ordinance amending ordinance number 13/2019 as amended previously by ordinance number 11/2022 and ordinance 195/2023 to reduce the number of directors on the board of directors of the Cleveland Heights Community Improvement Corporation. I didn't laugh the first time I read it, but that's because I didn't read it out loud. So we have a community improvement corporation, and we're basically changing that, or the mission of it. I know Councilwoman Cohen had some questions, but you wanna say
You
something?
want me to begin by overviewing the rationale for the changes? So the CIC was created to help the city more easily get homes built. So it was intended for that to be the place where we would send our vacant parcels and then they could identify developers to build homes. We had quite a few properties after the financial crisis, and we have slowly, over time, sold those to developers. We have a smaller number of properties right now, and after becoming mayor, I had to think about what direction do I think that we should take with this group. There was conversation about hiring an executive director for that group. And so in order for this group to be sustainable, they would need to bring in revenue to cover the cost of the executive director's salary and other expenses that they might have. There are really two ways that this group could bring in revenue. One, through fundraising, and my belief is that that would not be a strong source of revenue. And the other is through a margin on properties that it sells. So you might make $2,000 to $5,000 on each property. So what that means is that you really need volume in order to generate enough revenue to cover your costs. Again, we have, dispensed of a lot of the properties that we have, and I don't think that we'll ever again have, a large number of properties like we did after the financial crisis. And so at the end of the year, the planning department demonstrated that they are able to dispose of properties. Council voted to sell about 40 properties to each of Future Heights and Ishmael Martin. And so this would, in essence, allow that process to continue. But the folks who are currently serving on the board of the CIC, who have a lot of experience in relevant areas like law and real estate, could continue to provide advice to the city through the creation of a new advisory group, which is in Ordinance 125. So in essence, we would make the CIC dormant. It would still exist, and we would have to file an annual we would have to file annual paperwork. And if we were to, for example, receive a large donation from a resident, that could be a place where we could receive it. But the folks on the board of that, our intention is to appoint them to the new group that would be created with 125, so that they could, for example, tell the planning department, we think that you should, charge more for each parcel or whatever it might be.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I guess I was a little bit blindsided in the sense that I thought we were gonna have another CIC meeting to talk about how we wanted to do this, but I mean, I appreciate your leadership on this. I think this is the better way to go. Councilwoman Cohen?
Yeah, so I mean, what's changed here, I mean, this is essentially setting up a different structure than what we had with an advisory board committee, which, I think makes sense because we want to retain that expertise, which was the goal coming out of the conversation of the CIC. I think what's slightly changed here is that it's not just residential parcels per se, but municipal property, like the disposition of municipal property generally. And so the one question that I raised back, which is something I think we're gonna take advantage of the 2 weeks between first and second reading to think about, is as we're creating this new structure, do we need or do we want a formal trigger by which council is notified in executive session before this advisory group is notified to opine on potential disposition of public property? Because with the CIC dormant, the president of council, which is one of the 3 board members of the CIC wouldn't be consulted. The Municipal Property Development and Disposition Committee would be consulted, but as of now, the council president is not on that, and I understand why, because we're creating this advisory board, and the chair of the Planning and Development Committee of Council is not on it, not on either body now as a result of the change. So we're kind of losing a bit of a link there. So I Mayor and I discussed it this afternoon, and I will say I don't think this is necessarily a hill to die on. I just think it's an opportunity to explore this idea of future-proofing how council is continued to be made aware of an administration maybe for the future where administration is not so collaborative and wonderful with council, how, if there's a need for council to have some sort of more formal mechanism there. And again, it may be that in conversations we decide it's not necessary because it happens naturally, or there's some other, through legislation, there's another way. I'm open to falling out on either side of this. I just think this is a really good time to explore it while we're in the middle
Yeah,
of
I think that this route actually increases transparency because with the CIC, after an initial vote by council to transfer maybe 200 properties over to it,
Agreed.
No residents would really have insight into what is happening with those properties. And aside from the president of council and the chair of the planning and development committee, no other folks on this council, because they wouldn't be on the board of the CIC, would have any insight into that. So with this approach, council members will continue to vote on every single disposition as they do today. This worked at the end of the year whenever we sold those properties to Future Heights and Ishmael Martin. And again, we can't sell properties without council's approval. So every single property that would go out would be seen by every single member of council before it's sold.
Go ahead, Director.
Just want to comment that the councilwoman provided a little extra context to her question, so I wanted to respond to it. We're always going to be advising you in executive session when there's council involvement, particularly with disposition. And so this advisory committee, I would say, would not hear about it first, because we're going to let you know, hey, there's interest in this property. We're working on how that may work out. And we're going to be talking to the advisory commission about pricing, about to get that advice. So I think it's to sort of foolproof it for the future. We can continue to keep you advised in executive session, but still allow sort of the initial negotiations on the administrative side to happen, which need to happen before we get to move forward with that.
Yeah, just a question on that, and I think that's a very good point, is that we've never had an advisory board. So and I guess I want to look back at the legislation, again, we don't have to do this right now, but if it really is required that this advisory board will advise on every possible disposition, I do think that's actually a good trigger, because you will not want to have, the administration would not want to tell an advisory board something before they would tell council. So I appreciate that, and I think the question now is, is that process-wise, well, is that required? And if that is required, then that feels good to me, for lack of a better way of describing it. But if it's merely the administration chooses to, then, maybe we put this in the legislation more of a requirement than a suggestion. Thank you, I appreciate that.
And based on a conversation I had with the mayor earlier, for 125, which is the creation of the Municipal Property Development and Disposition Committee, which is, the intention is to just reappoint the members, including the chair of the planning committee.
No, the legislation is written so that that group would be the residents who
Just
were.
the residents.
Right, the residents who were appointed to that to provide advice to the planning and development.
Okay, so could we, you're open to having the council make some of those?
Yeah, and it was originally drafted such that the administration would make all appointments, which is the legislation for the CIC that currently exists.
Right.
Currently, under the CIC, the mayor makes all of those nominations, like at the end of the year, when mayor, made 2 nominations to it. But in the spirit of collaboration, I thought that it could be better if we shared those. So the legislation will be updated to reflect that.
Okay, that was just the last part.
And again, the intention is to merely renominate all the folks who are currently serving on the CIC's board.
I think that would be good.
Which by the way is an outstanding group of
It is, it's
experts on
unbelievable.
this.
Yeah.
Mr. President, just
Yes.
a quick question, because I know I've spoken to the clerk about this. I think our original intention was to bring the second reading on 22nd.
Oh, for this?
Yes.
For 124 and 125?
Yes, and if we make those, if we clarify the one question and make that one change, is council okay with that?
I didn't have anything else.
Yeah, and we can work quickly to get this back for 22nd, it's fine.
So I'm gonna move ahead to 126 if that's okay. An ordinance amending the city's housing and business maintenance codes. So 1347.03 is let me see if Go ahead, anybody, please speak up if you have questions. I'm paging through my notes here. Director Hannah, did you want to say anything?
No, I mean, these are the amendments that were previously discussed related to some prior litigation. And so we would request that council move forward.
Yeah, I don't have any questions on this. All right, in that case, let's move on to second readings, thank you. So we have 114, which is the tax budget.
We heard about that
and the
last time,
perfunctory.
right?
I did have a question. This is the question I was looking for. This is the question for Director Brzezinski. This is really just a point of information under the statement of fund activity. There's a line for bond retirement. It's a pretty substantial line that takes a pretty significant outlay of expenses that then brings the funds down to about 400,000 from a high of 4 million. I just wondered if whether I just want to make sure I understand what that line is about.
For the taxes?
This is in your detail that you provide, statement of fund activity. It just caught my eye because we did spend some significant amount of time talking about bond retirement and debt retirement.
The one piece that we have that has not been from the previous year for the whole energy efficiency project with Leopardo is ramping in now,
I see.
Is what now? I'm sorry, I didn't hear them.
starting.
Oh,
It was deferred.
So that's what that $4.5 million outlay is.
That's a piece of it. That's a substantial piece to it, correct?
All right, and then 115 is an ordinance amending Part 1, Title 11, Chapter 171 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Cleveland Heights. Basically, this is to outsource contracts for youth, adult, and senior programming services. So
Or to give us more options,
to give us more options, sorry.
not necessarily outsource.
Okay. But, so, is this something, Councilman, that you'd wanna discuss in your committee?
Not personally, I'm satisfied by the explanation that Director Gonzalez gave 2 weeks ago. Which was that it's not about outsourcing or replacing, but it's, essentially allowing additional flexibility to add additional services to the senior center and the rec department.
I guess as I was reading this through, I was wondering, and I'm sorry he's not here because I would ask him today if he had anything in mind. Like some specific programming that, because, what we do is we just kind of, oh yeah, that's right.
no, I was gonna say, I think he did say last time that the personal training was
There's
a
actually in
goal.
the memo, he gives an example of new programming this legislation would allow us to bring in for the community, like a Crayola Imagine Arts Academy, Art Blazers, an 8-week after school arts adventure program for kids 5 to 8. So that's a type of program that we will never develop and build in-house. But it would be great if we can offer that to our residents, and this allows us to move beyond just employed staff that is providing those programs.
The plan here is to have a big emphasis on youth programming.
And that's great. I think I missed that part and I never see it.
President?
Yes.
I think it's also an issue of not having to worry about having an insurance requirement for some of these vendors.
I don't think so.
I think that is a separate issue.
It's related but separate, I would say. Because there are certain providers of services who were working essentially as individual independent contractors. And then a significant insurance requirement for somebody who's not doing a whole lot of work with the city is sort of difficult. So I think that the work recently has been to make some of those folks employees so that concern is diminished in that context. But those issues would still be addressed in these contracts authorized under this section if it's adopted.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on this legislation? We're gonna move on with the agenda because I'm looking at the time, I know we have this extra half hour. Just that because, okay, so ETC survey presentation. Okay. Yeah.
So should we do the update on the community instead? I know.
Well, he's been waiting 20 minutes,
Oh,
so but now he got kicked out and has to come back on because he was waiting.
I'll be short, so
Yeah, Mayor,
I
go ahead.
can, and then, so is it possible to, thank you. And if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. Thank you. So, as folks know, Cumberland turns 100 years old next year. Very excited about that. But the reality is that it's reached the end of its useful life. Before recent repairs, the pool was losing 13,000 gallons of water every single day. And we're grateful that most of that has stopped, but the reality is that was just a Band-Aid. Would you like to switch over to ETC or do you want me to continue? Did you want to tell him how much time he has? So that I think you should mention that. Where are the results of this?
Okay, Ryan, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Are you able to hit the share screen at the top?
Yeah, give me just a second.
And Ryan, I'm Council President Kuda. Welcome to Clear Heights City Council Committee of the Whole. You think you could do this in 20 minutes?
Yeah, we'll just cruise through the slides here real fast. Are you guys ready?
Sure.
All right, great. Thanks for having me. I'm Ryan Murray with ETC Institute. We are a market research firm. We do government surveys. Our work is municipally based most of the time, but we do work for large transportation agencies, including your local transit, bus and rail system. I also work with the city of Cincinnati quite frequently, doing a yearly survey for them as well as GCRTA. So we do a lot of work throughout the state of Ohio, but also nationally. And our purpose is really to help you all make better decisions through statistically valid data. And that really starts with the purpose of the overall survey, which is an objective assessment. So we want to use some benchmarking questions you've asked in the past to help gather input from residents to really help you set priorities for the delivery of services. And that really starts with survey design. So when we first initiated this, the idea was to work from past surveys, but also to ensure that we ask these satisfaction combined with importance questions, really to push our importance satisfaction analysis, which can help you kind of set some priorities, which we'll talk in today. We also want to track that performance over time and compare you to other communities. We'll look at some benchmarking today as well. In terms of methodology, it's a statistically valid survey. We mail to a random sample, collect randomly, and as we're collecting, we ensure demographic and geographic distribution of the results closely or relatively or very closely matches the true demographic and geographic representation of the community. And so you can see here that we had a good dispersion of responses from across the city. In addition to the geographic analysis, we also tracked age, race, ethnicity, and education level to ensure that we had a well-rounded sample. In terms of perceptions, we really want to ask respondents in the community generally how they feel about the city. Just keeping in mind, this is kind of a snapshot in time completed earlier this spring. We really want to better understand how residents perceive the delivery of services, perceive the quality of life. And so that can be a lot of fields. It can really have an impact from other parts of the country or parts of the community. And other things that go on throughout the community can have a dramatic impact on responses now and into the future. And the best example is usually a boil water alert, and that correlation of that in time related to the overall feeling of safety when it comes to drinking water. And those correlation or those factors can really tug and pull on each other for a long period of time. So when you think about some of the results, And when you look at some of this, always look through that lens of what else was happening? What has our community gone through over the last couple of years? How might this impact our perceptions? When we look at most of these charts and when you look at the report, the positive responses are going to usually be out to the left in a blue. The negative responses are summed primarily because some of the dissatisfied, very dissatisfied responses, the percentages are very small. And so it leads to clunky charts. At the end of the day, the full report that the city's in possession of includes a tabular data section. That section has the full decimals down to 1 decimal point, as well as the full breakout of those 2s and 1s on these charts. And just a little bit for interpretation, I typically interpret those neutrals as positive neutrals. It means that we didn't have a negative impact, but we're not having an overly positive impact in the respondent as well. So I usually kind of lump that into most of my satisfaction results. In terms of those maps that we just saw, the dot map, what we also want to do is provide some general guidance in terms of geography based on the number of responses within each one of the census block groups, which are those boundaries there, will shade the overall mean rating in each one of the areas across the city. These should be taken with a grain of salt. If you remember the previous slide or one of the earlier slides, there's not a ton of dots in each one of those areas. So just always take that with a grain of salt. But when I'm able to present, especially to electeds, I'm not a city council member of my own community, and I think it's really helpful to have me help just a single time interpret these maps. There's a full mapping appendix for every 5-point question we asked on the survey. You'll find an associated map like this. So I just wanted you to all kind of know that. Typically, the best use case for these are like codes enforcement or public works, pinpointing potential areas of higher levels of dissatisfaction. In terms of rating the overall city, place to live, place to raise children, we receive some really strong ratings. When we get to retire and work, it's where we start to see kind of a shrinking of our excellent and good responses. But with retirement, really a growing of the below average or poor. As we're all aware, the economics of the country, generally the overall level of confidence in our economy and the dollar have kind of decreased. And so again, thinking about other contextual items that can help kind of put not necessarily a reason, but help draw a picture as to why 1 in 3 respondents might be saying that it's a below average or poor time to retire in our community. In terms of some of the overall ratings, we're going to look at these at a closer look in terms of trends, but I wanted to provide a generalized picture. When we looked at the survey results and push analysis, we're pushing important satisfaction analysis. And in this year's survey, the enforcement of city codes and ordinances and the maintenance of city streets, buildings, and facilities really read streets and sidewalks out of that are our 2 opportunities or highest opportunities for improvement. The analysis pinpoints areas with higher levels of dissatisfaction and higher levels of importance. So you'll see the higher levels of dissatisfaction here in a little bit. We'll take a look at that importance. In terms of trends, I know it's really important for us to kind of see how we've compared over the last 6 years. 6 years is a huge trend line. Most of my communities will do surveys either every year or every other year to kind of help maintain and manage some of the trends or some of the changes in our overall satisfaction levels. And this year we have almost 70 areas comparable between the 2 surveys, 2020 and 2026. Of the areas that were directly comparable, 66 out of those 69 areas saw a decrease in positive ratings. And of those, 61 were significant. So we kind of glossed over this, but at the beginning of the survey presentation, I've got a margin of error in the results. The margin of error is what tells me whether or not it's a significant real change from the last survey results. When we talk about significant decreases, those are decreases that actually expanded and went over our margin of error, telling us there's a true and actual difference in some of the overall opinions of respondents. Here's kind of a noteworthy slide of just grabbing some of those notable decreases since 2020. We see everything from value of taxes to overall quality of services provided by the city on this list. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper and show you some of those trend lines. These are comparing our positive responses, our 5s and 4s, satisfieds and very satisfieds or excellent and good ratings, compared to the sum of those same ratings from 2020 and 2014. And we can see that the 2020 and 2014 results were much more of a high water mark than what we found in 2026. We can see that the value received for city tax dollars and fees has decreased significantly. And when we look at the quality of our major categories of services, we can see that each and every one of those perceptions-wise, or at least community satisfaction ratings, have gone down. One thing to always keep in mind is that not all residents have a firsthand perspective of each one of these categories or each one of these services. So when you look at these, please just keep in mind, this is a perception of how the service is being delivered. You've got subject matter experts that are heading each one of these major departments. They can really give you kind of the brass, the nuts and the bolts of things. What are those national KPIs that actually assess our performance in terms of delivering public safety services or the quality of wastewater and sewer services? So before we, look to staff as to, hey, what's going on, we should always be thinking about perceptions and then looking to staff to kind of help better understand if there are operational issues that are potentially occurring. In terms of codes enforcement, this is one of our top priorities for improvement. We can see dramatic decreases for enforcing the exterior maintenance of business property, both residential property, and the cleanup of debris on private property, as well as the quality of the building and permit process, which we know not everybody goes through, but generally we can see a decrease. Normally I would be presenting this just slightly differently, but overall satisfaction with these items is never very strong. We're seeing a really solid decrease in overall satisfaction or overall perceptions with these items. Sometimes when we get into tougher financial times, codes enforcement can be one of those areas that begins to decline first if members in our community are having a difficult time upkeeping their homes or businesses. City maintenance is one of the other big topics here. It's really focused on that city streets, particularly streets and sidewalks for the most part. We can see kind of right in the middle, we have maintenance of major city streets and infrastructure. Prior, it was the maintenance of many major city streets in the survey. Saw a big decline there. We also see a decline in adequacy of city street lighting all the way down to maintenance of neighborhood streets, which is at about 1 in 5 residents saying that they're satisfied. We see the same thing with the overall satisfaction, and this is actually public safety services. I apologize, I'll make sure that we got an update to Jessica, but this should be satisfaction with public safety. I put this in last minute while I was in the lobby. This is one of the other areas that's really important to respondents in the survey, overall public safety services. And we saw declines in this area too. I didn't show everything, but just keep in mind 66 out of the 69 areas saw a decrease that was significant. So we see a lot of these decreases across the board. In terms of benchmarking, we don't want to ignore trends, but at the same time, national and regional benchmarking can really help provide some context to some of our lower ratings potentially. You rated above the national average, and about half of the areas assessed, about 40% of those, 18 out of the 45 were significantly above the national average. And you had the same number of items rated significantly above the North Central average, which includes Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Again, significant differences that are those that exceed our 4.6% margin of error, about 5%. So we can see out to the left, we see as a place to live, how quickly police respond to emergencies, all the way down to effectiveness as communication and efforts to keep us informed. Out to the right, we see some of those top priority area items, maintenance of streets, maintenance of city streets, buildings and facilities, which come from 2 different sections of the survey, a couple of communication items, and then down towards the bottom, we see value for taxes, and then 2 or 3 codes enforcement, really 4 or 5 codes enforcement items. So that's a real big sign in my eyes that enforcing the cleanup of litter and debris, enforcing residential and private property maintenance and upkeep are going to be really important to folks. We're significantly above or below those national benchmarks in that area. And the same pretty much holds true for our regional benchmarking as well. Those are areas that we're not only identifying as high priorities for residents, lower satisfaction, higher importance in the survey, but we're also seeing that we're trending below national and regional peers in some of those areas, which tells us that it's a compounding effect. But some of the good news here is that as a place to live, we're much higher overall quality of customer service, effectiveness of communication, which tells me that the city has the toolbox and the tools needed to make sure that we can turn this around perceptions-wise with solid messaging, obviously a change in the delivery of some city services, but we can begin to educate, hey, we heard and now we're responding. And when we talk about the effectiveness of that communication or overall how we're keeping people informed about the priorities that we've listened to and heard and now are responding to, we're performing much above the national and regional averages in those areas. And so there's some great tools that are in here as well that can help us push messaging as it relates to some of these opportunities that we'll see now based on the important satisfaction analysis. And so when we ask respondents to rate the satisfaction, which we've seen a couple of times already, the follow-up question is, which of these services are most important for us to provide? And the idea behind the analysis is really to assess where average satisfaction is lowest and where that importance is much higher. And so we can see immediately the maintenance of city streets, buildings, and facilities is the most important item for the city to provide. It's likely an issue of lower quality services in the eyes of respondents, which is pushing that narrative a little bit. If we're able to increase the level or the quality of city streets citywide, we should begin to see a shrinking of that importance. And folks will begin to, and want to invest in other areas. Please touch this area. The enforcement of city codes and ordinances falls right about in the middle, but overall satisfaction is so relatively low that with 1 in 3 respondents basically telling us that it's one of the most important services to provide, it turns out to be a higher opportunity for improvement. I'm going to take you to not the IS ranking column, but the one just second from the right. It's our important satisfaction rating. Sometimes I'll strip this down a little bit and show you just the ranks or just the overall percentages. But in this instance, I wanted to make sure that the rating was in there because you can see how far and above the maintenance of city streets, buildings, and facilities is, even compared to the enforcement of city codes and ordinances. Those are both relatively low satisfaction items with relative high importance, but we can easily see that the maintenance of city streets, buildings, and facilities, because it's so important, is likely to have the greatest tug and pull on overall satisfaction moving forward. The way that we interpret this is that the items towards the top, really those 5 top items, are those items that are going to give us the biggest return on our investment as it relates to perceptions and overall ratings on the survey if you're to do this again in a couple of years. Items at the bottom, quality of public safety, effectiveness and communication, efforts to conserve energy. Even if we're to make massive improvements in overall satisfaction in those areas, relative importance is somewhat low, and so we're unlikely to see a massive return on that investment. But quality of public safety service is one of those areas that is important. It is satisfied pretty high, so we want to maintain that level of service. So areas in yellow are maintenance issues, continue to maintain. Areas in that orange all the way up to the red are those areas that could use some additional emphasis. I do like to show a variety of these maps. These are our high opportunities for improvement, including the maintenance of city streets, buildings, and facilities, where you can see there's a couple of pinpointed census block groups that are red compared to orange and yellow throughout. And then we can see how the overall satisfaction, even though it's a high priority, begins to shift more to neutral in this particular item, the enforcement of city codes and ordinances. Still pretty important, still relative low satisfaction, but we can see that the overall satisfaction for this item is much lower than the overall enforcement of city codes and ordinances. I'm a little bit ahead of schedule here, but when we talk about what the top priorities for the city should be over the next couple of years, what I really wanted to point out to council is that respondents match what they'd already told us. Respondents are probably not aware of the important satisfaction analysis, and a single response out of 400 or some responses is difficult to manipulate any type of result. At the end of the day, we use important satisfaction analysis to pinpoint areas that are likely going to have the biggest impact on our priorities or biggest impact on our opinions of the city moving forward. In a separate question in a separate spot of the survey, we asked respondents what should be the top priority for the city over the next 2 years, and they doubled down on infrastructure maintenance, retail commercial district revitalization, which is hand in hand with some of those codes enforcement items for private property, and then public safety being that third priority, where relative importance is high, but also satisfaction is generally high. When we look at items like business development, improving recreational amenities, housing support, those items are important for about 1 in 4 households or so. But we know not every household has a youth in the community, so not every household has a child where youth outreach would be the highest priority for their home. Environmental stewardship, we saw in another slide, that item is kind of lower level priority. And then new housing is one of those also other areas that's just towards the bottom of this list. But it's a great sign that our respondents responded honestly to the survey. They pointed to priorities through analysis that they weren't able to impact in terms of what should be our priority moving forward. And they doubled down later in the survey in this particular question, which I think is an excellent sign that should hopefully provide council and staff with some additional residential guidance as you move forward. And the last thing before I display my question slide, this is one piece in a huge engagement puzzle that your staff are constantly trying to put together. It's a great way to touch base with the aggregate resident, average person. But by no means does this mean that it's got like every single stakeholder's voice heard, right? You've got stakeholders and other special interest groups across the city that have priorities. And so you're gonna have to balance some of the community survey findings with some of those other stakeholder voices to make sure that you're taking a well-rounded approach to decision-making as it relates to budgets and investments and things like that. With that at. I think I cut it in about 2.5 minutes, maybe a minute and a half shy of our 20. And if staff or council have additional questions after this, feel free to get them over to me and I'll be happy to respond with a written response to you.
Brian, that was terrific and very
Thank
informative.
you.
Very good.
And we and you never say the word which
Yes.
I'm impressed.
but by all means, let's yeah.
I read through all of the general comments, Ryan, and they're very enlightening. So I would like to see if this makes sense. Two things. First of all, there's so many valid, relevant issues listed in those general comments. Is there a way to break those down into, say, departmental responsibilities? Because right now they're alphabetical. So could you break it down to keep comments together that apply to the department so they can have that as some guidelines? Is that possible to put that together, or is that too time consuming?
Yeah, we can take a look at them by department guidelines, and I'll work with Jessica to try to figure out what the best determination is. And I can also provide those in a more raw format so you guys can manipulate them. We do it alphabetically to always avoid some kind of bias. Hey, you put Shirley's comment first instead of mine. So we're trying to avoid that by saying, hey, they're all alphabetical listed. But yeah, we can easily do that, and I'll work with Jessica to kind of better understand how that might best be formatted, and we'll try to do some analysis that way for you.
My second is so many comments ask for more activities for our youth, even though that number 15 was closer to the bottom. People that are concerned about youth activities. I would like to see a second survey. Do you ever do targeted surveys for youth, like to do an Instagram survey or something that's on social media?
Yeah, we don't do a lot of that. I think staff could easily handle something like that through SurveyMonkey and just get as much feedback as you can. But we do community surveys across the country as it relates to Parks and Recreation. And so we do a ton of Parks and Recreation surveys, and I'd be happy to work with staff to kind of better understand potentially, some of the questions that they should be asking to kind of help put that into perspective for them. Very much so.
Thank you.
Council Vice President Larson, did you receive all the results? Because I only received the executive summary. Is there another document that we should be?
There are two documents on the email that Jessica sent out on May 12th. One is the first one is the Cleveland Heights survey, and I believe that's the general comments. Yes, open-ended comments. A long huge list.
I only have
May
the executive
12th.
summary.
I only have the executive summary that was
Who was
sent
it
on
sent
June
to?
11.
Oh, you sent to council.
Or Gail, your email, who was it sent to? I think it was on council.
I know a bigger document exists. I was supposed to be on you may recall the Public Safety and Health Committee really pushed for this after council as a whole agreed that we needed to really
We can make, I'm sorry, Councilman. I interrupted you, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I would say, the data's, I've seen the data. I think everybody here at this table should have access, and I think you're about to say.
Yeah, we can, this is my fault. When I had Jessica send it to you, I told her just to send the executive summary on June 11th. Thinking that maybe that was enough, but we could send a more encompassing document to you as soon as tomorrow.
And can we get the deck also from
Yes.
Ryan? Yeah,
Yes.
okay, great, thank you.
Are there any
And there's just a lot in that report, and I will usually recommend to staff, like, hey, let me get in front of them if possible if we're gonna do this, and kind of go through generally the results. And then once you guys have kind of heard that high level overview, digging in is a great opportunity for you all to get some greater insights, digging a little bit deeper there as well.
Go ahead.
I just wondered whether there's plans to redo this survey. This was done in early 2026, correct?
Yes.
That's when it was done, which was, a lot has happened this year. It would be interesting to see what the community thinks about.
Yeah, that takes some time. I don't know.
It doesn't have to be this year, but maybe every other year.
I think the goal is to do this every, 2 years, as the mayor and we and our
Thank
team
you.
talked about.
I think that's great.
Councilman?
My question was just to clarify the dates of the survey. I know it was earlier this year, but.
Yeah, let me just get that.
While they're looking.
Yeah.
Can anyone say they're surprised?
No, I
mean, we've
I
got
accept this totally.
a lot of work to do, and I hope that we're gonna you know, put out some sort of action plan to our residents to let them know what we're gonna do. I know we've taken a lot of steps, but we've got basically, you know, 6 years of decline. And you know, part of that is also the poor perception that the public has. I think we're really turned things around in the 7 months this year.
And I'll add, I mean, I think it reaffirms the conversations we've been having here, because when you talk about streets, we've had the conversations about doubling the street budget, the early bidding, looking at snow removal differently with a plan for next year. I'll just say, I think it confirms my questions about the street sweeper, like maybe we need to look at leaf pickup, you know, we need to look at all that infrastructure maintenance with a critical eye. And
This whole 5-year capital plan, these kind of things are game changers, but they take time. And, you know, I think in 2 years will, you know, I think it'll hopefully be different. I will tell you from myself, I accept, I mean, everything was like right at face value. There were only 2 things I saw that I thought, well, there could be some not alternative, but additional explanation on the public safety side, which was a little more negligible in the decline. You know, one of the things that's going on, and it's not just our community, is this kind of lawlessness on with drivers. And I look at it as more, it's real. It's very real. But I don't think it's an indictment of, you know, police, fire, or, you know, or EMS. It's just, you know, kind of a cultural, you know, failing really, and it's something that I think could drive an answer to a question that might be about safety, but isn't really a criticism so much of our safety forces. And the other thing was the 57% that are not satisfied with the value they're getting for their tax dollars. You know, that was so separate from the other declines. And I do think that you know, where you saw satisfaction with a lot of the city services, and then all of a sudden that one, I think part of it is just, I heard, as I go door to door when I'm campaigning, I hear a lot of people say the taxes are too high. And that's a different criticism than, you know, city services are bad. But I do see how it could get conflated if people think they just pay so much taxes that their expectations, you know, for this money, we ought to be getting, you know, and I do get that, but that is a little bit different than saying the services are bad. And I'm not sure how to disaggregate that from that answer.
I think, Mayor, that's a great point. I'll start with the taxes. As the services begin to get better and as people's streets begin to get paved, the perception is that the value is going up. The big issue with our taxes and the values received for taxes is that the dollar is going less far. Taxes have not really changed or increased. And for the most part, schools are dominating most of our tax bills, and I'm guessing the same is there in Cleveland Heights. At least it is in my community. About 65 to 70% of most of our tax bills are going straight to the schools, a bigger portion to the county, safety districts, and then our municipal entities are gathering whatever's left, mostly relying nowadays on sales tax or special taxing districts. It's a difficult item that I think is more correlated to overall perceptions and feeling related to the economy than it is anything else typically. But as services increase, the perceptions will increase in that area. Around public safety, I always ask my clients first, how fully staffed is your department? Each and every single police chief across the country who has an understaffed department is not failing in recruitment. It's the fact that there's a low pool potential employees to draw from, and that pool is getting lower and lower, but also a little bit worse for the wear in terms of some of those police officers that are floating around there in the unemployed ranks. City of Cincinnati has experienced the same issue to a much higher level in terms of overall perceptions of their police force, feeling of safeties with a massive shooting downtown that was just super visible last summer. And they have even tried to study the police issue, and really what it boils down to, Mayor, is exactly what you said. It's traffic enforcement, and it's the perceived value of the traffic enforcement. Your top public safety item is the city's efforts to prevent crime, and the reason I put that in air quotes is because it's kind of an enigmatic thing that we ask historically. We have benchmarks for it. We want to understand how people feel about it. But really, it's tied to that visibility of police in neighborhoods, which is tied to staffing, which is tied to funding, which is tied to our taxes. And those are difficult conversations to have. I think I heard you say these things take time, and that's exactly what's going to take place here. We didn't necessarily watch the decline from 20 to 22 to 24 to this year, and we hopefully will see an increase of those responses that investments are made. Just a piece of anecdotal evidence, when I got on my city council 5 years ago, we had not spent money in years. We didn't have a functioning city administrator for years. We spent millions and millions of our street fund and sewer fund, and we're still getting beat up on our local chats and in our Facebook about spending money in the wrong ways. And so it's always going to be a perception issue that we need to do our best to, again, leverage our tools, those communication tools that we have to help promote what we're doing, but eventually push will come to shove, and you must show results that can either be achieved citywide by saying, like, your tax dollars in action, here these road improvements come. As soon as the road improvements are complete, your tax dollars in actions completed as promised. And those types of messaging segments across the community can really help as well push value and taxes to increases or differences in services over time. And so really doing your best to just correlate all that stuff, I think will push the survey. Keeping in mind it's a perception survey. We're asking laymen about delivery of city services when we've got experts in the room who really know how well those services are being delivered.
Appreciate that. Yeah, let's say one last thing because
I just want to say thank you to Councilor Posh
yes.
for getting this started, initiated it, and council. And Ryan, absolutely the kind of expected. You delivered very well. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Ryan, yeah, thank you. This is absolutely fantastic information that I think we could use in budgeting and all sorts of things. So not this coming public safety committee meeting, but the next one. Actually, I don't even know if we're gonna have one in July, but we'll have to figure that out with timing. But I'd like to maybe spend 20 minutes, like a good part of the agenda, where council can actually get a bigger document and discuss some of these things. Because there's a lot of nuance in this, and I think it's gonna really help set the tone in how the priorities are. I am tickled to death that so many of these things are already being addressed by our administration and our mayor. And I think it was all because, I mean, the streets, we were crying, pleading for the streets, and the former administration kept on pushing back at us. And it's just like, I just can't, it's unfathomable. But we're in such a better place. We still have to prove everything that we're doing. But it's nice to see some information on paper backing up some of the things that we felt were important.
And I think what you said about, I think we do need to sit down and talk about this survey and how, in terms of the budget, this would be a wonderful conversation. Ryan, thank you so much.
Yes.
Really appreciate it. All right, Mayor, why don't you go expand on Cumberland Pool a little bit because you got cut off.
Yeah, so I guess if we go to the next slide where we're at, thank you to Councilman Craig Cobb for suggesting that we create a task force for renovating or rebuilding Cumberland. It has been a wonderful group to work with, and so far the group has received overviews about landmark and ADA requirements, and they've toured 6 pool facilities with more planned. We put out 2 RFPs, one for an owner's rep and one for an engineering and design firm. Next slide, please. We received it's actually, I thought that it was 7 owners reps proposals. There were 3 firms that we invited in for interviews, and we have follow-up interviews with them later this week. Our expectation is to settle on one after those second interviews. And from the 12 engineering and design proposals submitted, we reviewed them and are inviting 5 for interviews next week. And as it says at the end of the slide, we continue to look for funding opportunities for the pool. So on the next slide, we see just a very brief overview of what an owner's rep would bring to the table. In essence, this is a project manager who will help us to drive this forward and reach a successful outcome. We don't want to invest millions of dollars in renovating or rebuilding the pool only for it to fail, which is what we have heard from some projects. They, for one reason or another, were unsuccessful with their project, and we want someone who has experience in building pools to help us drive this forward. Because unfortunately, the reality is that most people in this building have never been a part of renovating or rebuilding a pool. On the next slide, we overview what an engineering and design firm will bring to the table. It's really important that we get them on board so that they can start taking core samples over at the site. Just because we were able to build a pool there 100 years ago, that doesn't mean that a firm today would choose to put it there. And so that we can better understand what we're working with, we need to get this firm on board sooner than later so that they can not just design a pool for us, but help some of the collect some of the preliminary information that's going to inform some of the later decisions. This group will also be the primary group leading the community engagement, which will be robust for this effort. Yes.
Could I ask, when will we get a sense from the engineering firm of whether whether the best way forward is to renovate or build a new pool? And perhaps even,
I think later this year, we're going to have a pretty good sense of that. And so our hope is to have this group on board as soon as possible so that they can start public engagement while the pool is still open, but so that they can also almost immediately start the core samples that are going to be required. If we are able to get them on board this month, then it seems like we should have some preliminary feedback later this year so that we can settle on a design and then start procuring materials next year. Just to further talk about this, our goal has always been to try to avoid losing a season of Cumberland. So in Lakewood, for example, they were able to recently do that. And so just last weekend, we were out there speaking with their team members. And it seems that with a very disciplined schedule and experienced team members, we should be able to do that here. So what we have been consistently telling potential owners, reps, and designers and telling other stakeholders like the task force is that we would want to close the pool in August of 2027 and then immediately begin work so that we can reopen it in June of the following year.
the end of August.
Correct, near the end of August. So just slightly sooner than it would ordinarily close and then open it just slightly later than it would ordinarily open. So on the next slide, we have overviewed some of the milestones for selecting an owner's rep. We issued the RFP, we received the proposals, we interviewed them, narrowed them down to 3 who we interviewed on the 9th and 10th. Those folks came in and it was very helpful being able to hear what they would be able to bring to the table and ask them questions. We are currently speaking with their references and we look forward to, like I said earlier, having follow-up interviews at the end of this week. On the next slide, we overview some of the milestones for selecting the engineering and design firm. And we issued an RFP. We also had a site visit. So we had a number of firms come out so that they could understand what they would be working with. And we narrowed the proposals down to 5, which, like I said, we will interview next week. Our intention is to, after selecting an owner's rep at the end of this week, have those folks involved with the selection of the engineering and design firm. All 3 of the groups that we invited in, we brought this up to, and they're eager to be a part of that process. And so going to the next slide, it's important for us to get the owner's rep and engineering and design firms on board as quickly as possible. And so continuing to the next slide, we provided an overview of some of these dates. There are a lot of dates here, and some of this has changed. So the very last bullet point on here was is already on there. So I apologize for that. So we'd have to take that off, and we can provide an updated slide deck to you all. But tonight we have a first reading for the appropriation for the owner's rep. Our intention is for there to be a second reading and a vote on the 22nd. Also on the 22nd, we would have the first reading for legislation that would authorize and direct the mayor to enter into a contract with them. And our hope is that there would be a second reading and a vote on that legislation authorizing and directing us to enter a contract on the 26th. So while that's an overview of the activities for those important pieces of legislation for the owner's rep, continuing to the next slide, we have an overview of the schedule for legislation specific to the engineering and design firm. So on the 26th, we would have first readings for two pieces of legislation, one making a budget amendment and two authorizing and directing the mayor to negotiate and sign a contract within the engineering and design firm. And then we would have second readings and passage or votes on those pieces of legislation on the 6th. We cannot do the appropriation tonight for the engineering and design firm. You may say, oh, hey, we have a budget amendment on the agenda tonight. Why don't we just do both tonight? It's because we still need to negotiate a price with them. So we are pretty confident that what we are asking for, the $300,000, will be adequate for the owner's rep, but we don't have a good enough sense yet for the amount that's going to be needed for the engineering and design firm.
So it's gonna be more than the owner's rep.
Correct, yes, yeah. And we have been working very hard to actively manage our budget for this year. As I've shared over time, there have been a number of large unexpected expenses that came in. That was the motivation for putting in place, in essence, a hiring freeze and a freeze on the purchase of new vehicles. Because we have actively managed that, we're confident that we will be able to fit these two large expenses, one for the owner's rep and one for the engineering and design firm, in the existing budget so that we will not have to take money from our savings at the end of the year.
Well, thanks for laying this out. That's very methodical. Go ahead.
Quick question, did you see local firms coming to apply to be owner's reps, so they have some history with our city?
All of them, actually. All of the owner's reps were local. So it's very likely that we will have both an owner's rep and a designer from Ohio.
Who's the, which department is managing this? Is it the mayor's office? Is
It's
it Parks
being
and Rec?
driven by the mayor's office, but we have a number of departments who are in our regular meetings. So for example, in the interviews, we had both planning and finance in those meetings.
As well as parks, right?
Oh, and parks, yeah. Thank you.
You would hope so.
This is amazing. This is is there anyone in the city who was around when the Cumberland Pool opened in 1920?
that
I don't
would be-
think there is.
It would be wonderful if we.
I was, remember?
And we also, in talking with owner reps and designers, we've been setting the expectations that we will periodically provide updates to city council. And so, if there is a particular cadence that you're interested in, we're interested in hearing that so that we can make sure that we accommodate that.
So when we built the high school pool and the high school building, I was very, very involved in that process. And we found a lot of success in the latter part of the project because of how we worked with an owner's rep, specifically like with the pool. And what's nice is, you have these architects and engineers, you have all these people, but sometimes you just need to have someone that has this level of expertise that's gonna tell you, no, you can't value engineer the wood ceiling out. You need the wood ceiling because the metal is gonna deteriorate if you put structural steel in an inside pool. And this is stuff that was all set to get engineered out. And the pool would be almost useless, like 10, 12, maybe 20 years from now. A wood ceiling, it lasts almost forever. So this is the kind of benefit and the expertise that you get. And I'm so happy that you're sort of following this process as you're moving through, and you've really got your act together with these dates and the thoughts, and that's really very impressive. So.
All right, we're gonna have to move on to Councilwoman Collins' section of the agenda, so.
Yes, and I think, so Landmark Commission, just throw it over to the law director for an update on the follow-up from our questions.
So the planning director and I have talked about this, and he went through and made some initial revisions to address a number of the 5 subjects that we reviewed principally in the last committee of the whole discussion. And what we haven't yet done is, or I have not done, is to go back through some of the process related questions with regard to meetings and notifications and the mechanics of requesting the removal of his designation, for example, the certified mail stuff. Those pieces still need to be addressed. But I think that our feeling was that we could have something to you between now and the 6th of July, potentially next week, that council could look at and decide when it wants to next discuss. And then the 6th could be a discussion in committee, or it could be, potentially an introduction if you have an opportunity before that.
So I have a present for you because we worked out a timeline and
Okay.
I think we're not scheduled until July 13th, Committee of the Whole,
Okay.
to look through that. So we have
Okay.
an extra, but if you could get it to us,
In
so
advance.
in advance, like
Yes.
as well in advance as possible, then we can really take the time to dig into it and come to Committee of the Whole kind of prepared to decide how to move forward on
I
that.
think that'll make sense, and because there are still some questions that council needs to wrestle with a little bit further, and so having something in writing in front of you, I think will facilitate that.
And the time, the request for that Committee of the Whole meeting was 30 minutes to give us enough time to discuss those questions and make some decisions.
Sounds right.
I don't have your email where you laid it all out.
That's what I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, so when's August, did you wanna get
So
it
this,
going?
so the timeline that we're working with now is this is the June 15th discussion follow-up, July 13th, 30-minute discussion in Committee of the Whole. And then make some decisions, and then looking at August 17th after the recess for the introduction for first reading. So that'll give the law department time to put it together, and then we can discuss on the first reading if we wanna continue a discussion in Committee of the Whole, or if we're gonna move to passage.
Just one question, would you like to have the Landmark Commission and or Naylor Wilman at that meeting on the 15th?
I think that makes sense, because if we're gonna be making decisions, we'll wanna have them in the room to bounce those off like we did in the previous.
Send it to them as well.
Yeah.
In advance.
Okay, so that's Landmark Commission, moving right along. ADUs, I just wanna, before I turn it over to Director Zan, I just wanna say that the information that we were sent as a follow-up to the public, the meeting that we had was just excellent, and really incorporating the public feedback into a new red line of the code changes, and also the memo and the memo that analyzed the coverage issue in terms of how that relates to square footage of potential ADUs. So I just want to publicly thank the planning department for those materials. It was really helpful. I'll just turn it over.
And I absolutely want to give Xavier and Brooke a lot of credit for doing a lot of work. Just in quick summary, I know we're short on time. There were a lot of really good comments at the meeting that we had on June 2nd. And we took a look at a bunch of things coming out of that meeting. We tried to summarize those in the memo. We made some changes related to that. We've got some items in there that are policy discussion items that it would be great to get your input on tonight. But ultimately, our goal with all of this is to see if council is willing to start the formal process on the 6th, which would then allow that legislation to work its way through the Planning Commission while you're on break, and then come back to you for public hearings and more discussions after the break. That doesn't mean that you can't change this along the way. I said in the memo, South Euclid did exactly that. The Planning Commission has done that on other items here. So we can spend as long or as short on the discussion tonight, but really the hope is to get some direction about moving that to legislation for the 6th if possible.
So I want to throw out, so there were some significant changes that were made in the code, the proposed code changes as a result of the public meeting that we had, which included making ADUs conditionally permitted that means that it would go to, it's not permitted by right, it would go to the planning commission, and that would require, as I've talked about, notice to neighbors, right, in the notice proximity that we have right now, and a public hearing at the planning commission with the opportunity for feedback to the planning commission. The planning commission has to grant or not grant the conditional use permit, and they can put really an endless amount of conditions on it. The authority is pretty broad, so that allows for the incorporation of neighbor input, essentially, in a very granular way. I mean, we have, just as an example, you know, the planning commission has in the past imposed on businesses hours of operation or security requirements, and with residential, we've moved setbacks and other things. So it's a really, I love that idea because I felt like it gives the opportunity for a public discussion between neighbors and the applicant to really sort through concerns, but also allow an applicant to move forward with an ADU, which to the point of the planning staff, I think, you know, we're hearing that that's a real need and a want from some members of our community. So I just want to kind of highlight that. And then now ask, since we're on a limited time, like, is there anyone that has strong feelings about changes they'd still like to see to the proposed legislation, knowing that we're going to go through a longer process?
Just to comment, I would like to say that I think the conditional use is a great thing. I just have a question. That currently ADUs are conditionally approved, correct?
Well, currently they're not permitted at all.
They're not permitted at all, okay. I think one of the arguments that I remember about this legislation was that individuals who want an ADU have to go through a great deal amount of expense in order to even be able to walk before the planning commission in advance. And do you feel that this inhibits then, does that make that even more difficult for those owners in terms of what your requirements would be? Or would you have enough pre-approved specs for the ADUs that if they were compliant, it really is about neighborhood involvement as opposed to the actual design of the ADU?
I think much more the latter. You know, there's a certain amount to get a permit, you have to do your design. And so what the planning commission is going to ask is lesser so than that design. So I don't see it as a burden outside of the fee for it, which is not very high,
Right.
and the time to wait for that approval. Those are the two things which we can start with. And then if we see that these things are going well, we can make that administrative.
So secondary to just one follow-up on that, still in the legislation is the proviso that allows the ADUs to have home-based businesses there, and it's still wide open. And I wonder if now that you've added this conditional requirement, that you incorporate the proposal for a business in the conditional use permit. And that there be, you know, and whether, let's say somebody built an ADU and then 2 years later they decide they just have to do a business, that they have to come back and get that business approved.
Anytime a use changes, they would have to come back for renewing their conditional use.
I just think
permit,
that it sits in the legislation just as a single line saying it's permitted. So I think that maybe you could more add to the legislation how that's incorporated in the conditional use, how business use would be incorporated in the business in the conditional use process.
Or you could take it out. I mean, the alternative is not permitting it as a business use.
So clarification on that, is it not that the same business uses that are already approved or allowed by right in residential districts would be allowed in an ADU?
That's how it's currently being proposed.
So it's not wide open.
Yeah.
It's the very strict, you know, few exceptions that are already allowed in residential
Might be
districts.
then pointed out in the statute, because right now it doesn't reference that. And for the reader who, you know, a individual reading the statute, they may not understand that there are those restrictions. So maybe that's just a reference.
How does this impact House of Worships?
I don't see how the two are connected. This is accessory.
You would open up a church or
Well, right now, those are
something.
not permitted at all. Neighborhood houses of
Okay,
worship are
well,
not permitted.
that was like, 'cause I know waiting for that to come up again before us.
Right, and similar, another use that would not be permitted, well, that was suggested by the planning department not to permit is a short-term rental.
Right.
In an ADU, and so that is also written into the
Yes.
new.
That will be written.
That was written to the short-term rental, we would work on aligning that with the short-term rental legislation.
What about the garage restrictions or garage restrictions, I suppose, with the conditional use permit piece. Gives some flexibility to the people that are reviewing these on whether or not to still require garage spaces.
Well, we're not, I mean, right now, there's a number of, we did this a few years ago, there's a number of ways that you do not have to have a garage, and those are administratively approved. And one of those, if I was reading the code correctly, would be if there is an ADU, you can not have a garage. So that would be an added condition. So is that what you're asking? Like you can have an
Yeah, so-
ADU instead of a detached garage?
Yeah, well,
or-
okay, so let's say someone's putting in an ADU in and their next door neighbor realizes that there's gonna be additional cars, but they have to be parking in the street.
Oh, the parking requirements you're
Right.
asking about. So that
So-
was the policy question that the planning department posed to us, and that might be, it sounds like the one outstanding question that we have, which we could, and then this is just a suggestion, we could leave it like this, send it to the planning commission that works on parking, you know, or we could make a policy decision now, have that written into the draft, and then have it considered and sent to the planning commission on July.
I think
Well,
that also
I
comes
mean-
into play with the business. I mean, that would be,
Yeah.
that was my main thing.
As a practical matter, you know, this is, I have no problem with this being introduced on the 6th of July, but I would want to refer it to committee because we just can't give it due diligence in a, you know, it's one item on a, you know, an agenda in a committee of the whole meeting. I mean, I'd wanna, you know, maybe we could discuss it on the 13th.
Can I make a suggestion? Because we, even though the planning commission has to, it's a zoning code change, right?
Yeah.
So the planning commission has to review it.
But that's just
But
that one part.
That's, no, well, that's the code itself, and then they make recommendations, but ultimately council can do whatever, we don't have to accept the planning commission's recommendations, and we can extend, even though it's on a first reading to send to planning commission, that doesn't mean we have to pass it after it comes back to us. We could send it to planning, which is what I'm suggesting, send it to
I see.
planning, get their input, then take their input and have the larger discussion, and then
No, that makes a lot of sense, and we do that with certain legislation that comes out of the department. Yeah.
I mean, would that be, and this, I think we talked about this a little bit, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's what I
that,
would recommend, is let planning commission make their recommendation and have that piece of information for then you to have the discussion.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the version we got on the 12th of June is the most current revised edition, okay?
and I would say, you know, unless there's an objection to sending it as is to planning commission, I would almost be interested in their
Yeah.
opinions on the policy questions that are outstanding there, and then we can take their recommendations and incorporate it into our
I'll
conversation.
just make one point.
Yeah.
On the conditional use, because that is a substantial change. My view on this is that the planning department has already done a really great job of finding a middle ground and finding, maybe it's consensus, maybe it's, you know, some bargaining between opening the floodgates and not allowing them at all. I think adding a further step towards an already compromise position, in my view, just adds complexity, cost, and time in order to do this. I think the economics of this are not something that are going to be supported where a lot of these are going to get built in the city. Where these will get built or where it makes sense for the homeowner because they have a family need or it serves a specific purpose for them that they're going to move forward with them. I don't think we do anything around conditional permitting for home additions. And to me, in a lot of ways, this is similarly disruptive to a neighborhood as a home addition. I think where I could get on board with that would be if the stage of going before for conditional approval is something that the city with the pre-reviewed plans and with the project library, we could start that process early versus, you need full design specs before going to planning commission. I mean, that can be $10,000 to get architecture drawings. If it's up to planning commission and whatever neighbors decide to show up and say, we don't want this, that to me is a significant burden on the resident and homeowner from going through the process. So I would say that we have already reached a very a real middle of the ground view on this, and I would say that I'm in favor of moving forward with that, shifting it to an additional review. They're already gonna go through design review, ABR. They may go through BZA. If we're adding planning commission to that, that's 3 to 6 months probably for the whole process.
Oh, we try to stack our meetings.
Yeah.
Less than that.
Probably 3 months.
It's a significant barrier in my view.
I hear, I think if you're still okay with having it introduced on the 6th and sent to planning commission to get their opinion, I would say if I were planning commission, I would want conditional use permit, but maybe they don't want.
I'm
Maybe they
sure,
don't want
I'm
that,
sure
right?
they're gonna want it.
Right, but
For right now, let's just hear,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's go through this process. I mean, we're not gonna do this here right now. Do you wanna talk briefly about Noble?
that's that was from planning, that was not
Yeah.
from me, so.
So very briefly.
Noble Taylor Public Art.
Yeah, this won't take very long at all. Last year, when you guys were discussing merchants associations, there was public art as part of those budgets, and council, spearheaded by Councilman Cobb, said, hey, we would like to have public art plans for these corridors, and yes, we'll add some funding to your budget for that. So we were able to get an RFP out. We received 5 responses, which were very good, but we had 2 that were particularly good, which was a local team of Land Studio and Heights Arts, and then a non-local team of Designing Local around Columbus. And we were really impressed with both of them. We interviewed both teams and are still really impressed with them. And since this is something that really was an initiative spearheaded by council, we wanted to brief you on that. Number one, in speaking with the mayor and Councilman Cobb, there was a thought of maybe bringing in those 2 teams to interview with you, so see which team you like better, because there are some differences. There's a local flavor and a not so local flavor, but sometimes the not so local flavor can be official. So really, that's the intention today, is to see where you'd like to go with this. We're ready to bring on one of those teams and bring legislation before you as soon as we possibly can, so we can get that going. But this is really a council initiative, so we wanted to give the ability to sort of lead. Councilman Cobb, if you wanted to add.
No, you did a great job of summarizing it.
Any of the Noble associations, Noble Neighbors, or the Noble Merchants Association have any say in this? In the selection, artist selection?
We have not done that yet. This was, we've reviewed this internally, and again, council funded initiative, so we wanted to give you.
This is not for art, this is for the study of the district to
I
see
misunderstood
what
you.
might be good
Okay,
locations.
Got you, okay, never mind.
Are you suggesting that you want council to make the decision, or you just want feedback so it would go back in the hands of the administration?
We bring each team in for an interview. You provide feedback to us before we make a recommendation, or before we bring legislation.
Thank you.
So the question is, when could we do that? Because your time is limited.
Sure.
Probably the 13th.
Okay.
July.
We're gonna be here all
You got both my meetings on the
Well,
13th too, right?
On the third.
I mean, we're already here, so it's like, I mean, that'd be our little send off.
14th, the start is ours.
We went over this last time.
If you can't make.
Oh, good, I got nothing else going on.
Bertrand, can we get a copy of those? RFPs?
Yeah, we wanted to have this conversation first, but we'll send you all the information.
Council Vice President, did you want to talk about rules a little bit?
Attached to the packet was under other, including a copy of the draft that I put together based on, at that time, Councilmember Davida Russell's input. And she did that, most of the work in February 2024. She produced the basic list. I modified it some, and I combined it with the Dublin, Ohio example of council rules and lived experiences of council members through some challenging meetings that those of us who were here went through. I drafted the document you see in your packet. Suggested revisions in italics at the end of certain paragraphs are provided by President Kuda. And it's very important that we have your input. And I don't know if we have time tonight, so we don't have time tonight, but maybe if you'd like to just email me when you get a chance to review and let me know what your concerns are and we can talk about them at some, maybe after recess.
We'll come up with a time.
After recess, is it okay with everybody?
And thanks for taking a look at it.
Sure.
So, Councilman Cobb, what's the plan for this section 111 review thing?
We'll finish it up. There's just a little bit left. Remember, we ran out of steam
Yeah,
at the last.
I remember I did.
We have like 10 subsections left.
We should be able to wrap that up relatively quickly.
Can you send us what we have so
Yes.
far? I mean, I just, it's like, there's so many things happen and
And, right,
and
and
thank you for scribing.
yeah, and I was gonna say, and the next step after we finish our review is to send it to the law
Oh,
department
yeah.
to get their.
Big powwow.
To help turn it around.
What's going on with this?
Just as quickly as
What's going on with this chair meeting?
Oh, we're trying to find a date. The June dates did not work, so I'm looking at July. I need to get on the poll and see what the date is looking like, but there's 2 dates I think that are coming.
Wait, when in July? Like early July, right?
It's like the 13th and then
The second,
yeah, I think it was the 2nd or the 13th. I'm gonna
Okay.
double check on the
All right, but
response.
I don't want anything in the middle of our time off.
Did council go to that meeting when you held it the last time? Or was it just for
No, I
you,
just
the
think it was,
committee
but it
and?
could have been
It was just a committee.
just the committee.
committee,
Yeah.
but we weren't doing what we're doing now, and that's attending
But
as
anybody
many
could,
meetings as
Right.
we're
I
going,
mean,
but
like
it's open,
anything,
yes, I
anybody could
welcome
come.
everyone to come to it.
but it was nice, you get all the chairs in the room.
And that one I will have it as an admin services, not as committee of the whole. But you guys obviously can come and just for purposes of scheduling, and you can do that one.
and the other, I had sent this just scheduling, if we can find a time, is that the planning department had requested an hour to an hour and a half for the zoning update. The zoning code update with the consultants, and so I've sent, we're trying to find that time. I think it may be hinging on when this chair
When the chair
meeting
was,
is,
yeah.
but we're also trying to get that in before recess so we can, have that.
Expect to hear from me today or tomorrow regarding some scheduling stuff. Tomorrow or Wednesday, sorry.
Can you send us also, Addie, the agenda, the raw agendas for the meetings as they're taking
Yes.
shape, so we all know what's on them?
Thanks.
I have 2 fast things for other.
Okay, just let me say this while it's on my mind. So you guys all know my virtual door is open. If you want something on the agenda, like committee of the whole agenda, just send it to me. Especially the 6th, just because, go ahead.
Chapter 1166 of the city code speaks to invasive plant species. And I've worked a little bit with Director Zamp, so he knows this is coming. As the zoning code's reviewed by our consultant, I'm gonna request that particular attentions be paid to chapter 1166.03C and 1166.04B, which address prohibited species. The invasive bamboo has come to our attention this past week. We've all gotten some information from citizens. It's extremely difficult and expensive to eradicate from our properties if it's not wanted. As the consultants look at this section, I'm gonna ask that the language be more specific as to those non-native invasive plant species and include a list in the zoning code rather than simply referring to the zoning administrator and the city's website. That is too cumbersome, so feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or thoughts on that. The other thing that I committed to doing was looking at the application form. And so I've got copies for each of you of the application was used the last time for you to review. And again, President Kuda sent out a question. I have looked at other cities and some simply ask for a cover letter and a resume. They don't have an application. President Kuda sent out a questionnaire which was used quite a bit during our last interview process. separately, but I think I'm gonna incorporate that into the application itself. And I'd also like to have you tell me if you'd like to see the application changed and or if you have questions you'd like to add. If I do not get a first draft done before recess, I'll have it ready when we return. And at our April workshop, a job description was suggested to give applicants a clear understanding of what being a member of city council looks like. If somebody else wants to work on a job description, I'm happy to have them do that.
I'll do that, we've just been through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we just need to tighten that whole thing up, but just keep in mind, nobody leaves, all right, you guys?
Or get sick.
All right, so I'm gonna adjourn this meeting at 7:32.